Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's, I promise you, a very lively, interesting panel because of the subject and also because of the guest speakers. The organizer did a great job putting together a group of speakers that would cover all crises in the Middle East. It's a tall order, but I happen to know most of them. I heard of them. I read some of what they do, and I think it's going to be an interesting panel. The subject of today is shifting paradigms, what evolutions in the Middle East. And you can imagine the number of subjects that they will be tackling. At the beginning, I'm going to ask every speaker to speak for 3 to 5 minutes, and then I encourage the panelists to interact with each other. If they have an idea they want to share, they want to comment, they want to challenge, I invite them to do so. At the end of their presentations, I will open the floor for Q&As, and then I will explain to you how it would work, the Q&A session. At the beginning, I would like to invite our next speaker, Ambassador from Morocco, Ambassador Assia bin Salah Alwi, and most of you probably know her work. She's an established diplomat. If I go over her resume, probably I will eat the whole session. So I'm going to invite her to be our first guest. Please, Ambassador. The mic, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Muwafaq. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're sorry, it's probably a bit early for you, but I'm happy to be part of this session because it really addresses one of the challenges that we are facing in a region which has always been volatile and where, as you know, we still have persistent conflicts, tensions, and hopefully a few good news. So we have very little time, so I would like to go directly, to our topic, and I will tackle briefly the few questions that were asked, especially about the consequences of the new Abraham Accords. And I do think that it's a bit early to speak about the consequences. It's just probably the immediate answers that have been done, the joy for some, like our Moroccan Jewish community, who will be able to come to Morocco formally and without hurdles, and actually it had already started. Concerns for others, and some opposition that are known, and of course still the core question of the Palestinian question, which is still on the table and not settled. So very briefly, everybody knows just a couple of words.
Ambassador, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because please, we hear some noise on the background. It's so difficult for us to understand and hear. Can anybody take a look? Is there an engine, something, Hello, anybody? Organizers? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but... Are you comfortable with this noise?
We are not comfortable, but I think we have to proceed.
Excuse me, can you do something about the noise?
No problem.
Please. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Everybody
please.
knows the context, and of course, President Trump's activism to bring about these accords, and especially his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And we do know as well that the problem is that afterwards we had to face the pandemics, which really was not the best context to start new declarations and accords. And because the pandemics monopolized, just as war in Ukraine is doing now, monopolized attention, energies, etc. And in this volatile, of course, Middle East, we still have the traditional tensions. I won't go through them. Everybody knows the persistent, of course, Palestinian question, but not only. Still Syria hurdles, the war in Yemen, and serious domestic turmoils, whether it's in Iraq, unfortunately the multifaceted as well crisis in Lebanon, and in Iran we are facing the rise of persistent turmoil, which probably pushes Iran to be even more aggressive outside and reaching out until our region, supporting the activists, and especially Hezbollah by proxies, against Morocco. And they have been extremely vocal, about this problem, and of course with the response as well of our neighbor who are not happy. And even since radicalization, the Morocco-Israel alliance is going, of course, to kill the region. So you see, all these violent reactions that we have probably to question. So what can we expect from these accords? Broad-based economic cooperation, I still have not my doubts, but I think we have to be cautious. Why? Because we have known already in 1994, the first summit of MENA, Middle East and North Africa, which was held here in Morocco, with huge expectations, and unfortunately, which was right away killed by the assassination of Rabin, and somehow by the access to power of Benjamin Netanyahu, who really was at the time hardliner. And we had relations, the Bureau of Israel here, the liaison, which has been stopped because there was too much radicalization of the positions, while, as you know, Morocco is really moderate and bases everything on dialogue, moderation, to build sustainable compromise. So I still do think that a full-fledged partnership, I'm talking only about my own country, Sam will have ample time, to develop about the relations with Emirates, which seem to be really progressing. But to speak about my country, I still think that a full-fledged partnership, which has a huge potential, and I'm happy about that, but it will not develop unless we tackle properly the Palestinian question. I don't think there can be a decoupling of the two questions. It will stay with us until we give it the appropriate settlement, giving to Palestinians their rights, their basic rights, and the right to have a stable state as well. The potential, huge, I said, in tourism, and it has already started with the direct lines, in a sector which is extremely close to my heart, food security. Here I think that we have, Mr. Ohana, a huge potential to improve in Morocco, to face the hydric stress, which is the problem in the region, across the region, and where the Israelis have developed exceptionally advanced technologies. And I do hope that we can really launch a very positive cooperation in that field, assuming that we are very cautious about which field, which products, how much consumption of water. Just to give you an idea, there were some rumors that there will be a joint venture to produce avocado, and I was absolutely stunned because it is devastating, for the environment, and it consumes a lot of water. So I think we could take much better advantage of the technological advance if we directed properly to the suited fields and production of products and so forth. We have the obligation to work together, as I said, in order to promote the whole atmospherics of the region. This is important, and this will be key to the development of cooperation. Not only to give more assurance to ourselves, to the two partners, and to the various partners so they can pick up the correct partner to build the future together, but it is a signal as well for the outside partners from Asia, as India, which is interested, as the Chinese, all of them. Of course, if we have a better atmospherics and appeased region, hopefully it will be a win-win solution for everybody. New strategic alliances have been asked. Just a very quick point on that, because we are seeing now tensions between the United States and the Arabs, some of the Arabs, on various subjects, and lately extremely violent reaction of Joe Biden concerning the OPEC decision. But we do know that Riyadh and Moscow are the pillars of OPEC and the OPEC Plus, so they are really going after their own vision and their own things. And we have some dissent of the Arab, as the Doha Forum has shown. But I don't think that any soon time the alliance or the close cooperation between the United States of America and the Arabs will stop, and that there will be a huge turn, in that. We have been through different cycles, and we will have to wait and see what we do of that. So, because we have a lot of interference of the regional and medium powers, just name it, Turkey, of course, which wants to play, the mediator, even in this war of Ukraine, and who had a hard stand, and now I see that it is, trying to safeguard its position of a mediator. And even with Israel, it has been cooling down, from the stand it had. Well, Iran, no wonder about that, because it is facing this turmoil, and it is really trying as well to divert the attention to other regions. Very quickly, what approaches to settle the Palestinian question, which is a core question? That's, Mr. Muwaffaq, is the $1 million question. And I would love to hear from the audience what are the proposals in this. What we do hope here in Morocco, because of our precedent experience, that the election of Mr. Netanyahu will go in the right direction to try to find and to build solid compromises and to address the question of Palestinians and their rights properly. Because, as I said again, the dividends of the Abraham Accord will be huge if we tackle properly this question. So allow me to finish on that, just saying that a question has been asked, what place for the Middle East, the new Middle East? We have been accustomed to have new Middle East every week or everything, because it is so volatile and things are changing and alliances are sifting, rifts within the Gulf itself, the CGT, and then reconciliation. So I hope we will hear from Tissam how robust is the reconciliation, despite the opposition of Qatar to these Abraham Accords, and I hope to hear, from you about that. Because Middle East, is not really a unity, as you know, or an entity. It is just geographic, and you have millions of definitions, because it includes as well sometimes North Africa, which is a totally different region with different interests and sometimes even divergent, perspectives about things. So we have seen the pivot of the United States from the Middle East to Asia, increasing the tension. And just to finish on a hope, I do hope that the general escalation of tensions, even between the United States and China, are going to cool down and to give us the opportunity to really address the real work that we have to carry together, and hopefully to combat the real question of climate change, to build up green and blue economy. And once again, there is a huge potential in the Abraham Accords for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I go to our next speaker, Mr. Ohana, I have a quick question for you, Ambassador. Those who advocated for the Abraham Accords, we keep hearing about common interests, common threats, common challenges between certain Arab countries and Israel, mainly Iran. So let's assume there is a resolution for the Iranian nuclear issue. Would this dynamic cease to exist? Is it out of conviction or just simply facing a common threat?
No, I think on the contrary, we have really blessed to have complementarities which we don't have much in the region except from the oil exporters and the others, and the thirsty, the very wealthy and the very poor. I think that with Israel, we have really common potential, to go ahead. Because even the country, for instance, I speak only about my country, is offering vast territory where different type of investments can be deployed, and not talking about Israeli investments only, but real joint ventures. And what is interesting is the human factor in this relation, because they know the cultural background. We have a lot of relay for public opinion. People are still interested. I have met, Moroccan Jews across the world, and they are the first to come and congratulate and speak, about their memory, even when they had left the country at 4 or 5 years old. This is an extraordinary asset. And I still think that you cannot make cooperation without the human factor. It's absolutely basic. Even that perhaps we will have, we have most of the Sepharad Jews, and we will have to learn something from the Ashkenazis as well. But I think that they have been living long together to have learned, the lessons about the discipline and rigor and whatever that is known, about the other part, the ethnic part of Israel. So I do think that these complementarities are really an asset. But my concern is that I hope that we do not spoil this huge opportunity which is offered by the Abraham Accords by really trying to be serious about it, to go for the appropriate solutions, and to tackle once again the Palestinian question.
Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Amir Ohana. He is a member of the Israeli Knesset, and he is formerly a minister of public security. And he just told me that he retained his seat in the Israeli Knesset in this election. Please.
Well, Your Excellency Ambassador, I did not leave Morocco when I was 4 or 5. I was actually born in Israel. But although I was born in Israel, I never left Morocco. As an Israeli of Moroccan descent, both my parents were born here and raised. My father is Rabbati and my mother is Wazania. The Moroccan culture and language and music and cuisine is and will always be a part of me. So for me to come here to this conference, seeing the Israeli flag waving out there with the Moroccan flag and all the others, is really moving. I was fortunate enough to be a minister in the government that signed the Abraham Accords with not 1 but 4 Arab countries. I was also fortunate enough to visit 2 of those countries, Morocco and the United Arab Emirates. And for many, many years, it was merely a dream of peace, because we couldn't have it. We were told that unless you resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you cannot progress with peace with our other Arab countries. The trouble is that we have tried. 2 Israeli governments went a very long way towards the Palestinians trying to achieve peace. One was 1993 with the Oslo Accords, where we have accepted to bring Yasser Arafat and many other members of his terrorist organization from Tunisia to Israel, basically saying, you know what, you want to rule yourself, go ahead. We gave them their territories, their uniforms, we even gave them the guns. You want to rule yourself, go ahead. Establish your own government, establish your own parliament, establish your own police system, judicial system, education system. Go ahead, do it. We want peace. And many Israelis expected that this will bring peace. But what did it bring? Terror escalating to levels we have never known before. We had our buses exploding, coffee shops, shopping malls, restaurants, with dozens of fatalities in each of those events. So you might expect that the Israelis are clever, they learned the lesson, but then came 2005, in which we have engaged from the Gaza Strip, saying, as the late Ariel Sharon, Prime Minister of Israel, said, we need to end the occupation on Gaza. And we have indeed, we have taken out the settlers living there sometimes for 3 generations. We took them out of their houses. We took the soldiers out. We took the camps out. We even took the dead out of their graves because we knew what would happen if we leave them there. Some expected that Gaza would become the Singapore of the Middle East. They have a beautiful strip by the shore. They will build hotels and invest in education and healthcare and everything that a normal people who wants to live does. Others were more skeptical. They said, maybe not the Singapore of the Middle East, but at least we won't have violence from that region. Because what's the case? We are no longer there. What did we get instead? We got missiles that would go further and further to kill more and more Israelis. We got tunnels underneath our villages to kidnap our civilians and soldiers. This is what we got. So you can understand why, unfortunately, I have to say that at this time, this conflict is probably not going to be resolved. There is no way that a conflict that did not begin when we liberated/occupied, depend on your point of view, Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as some refer to, won't end even if we evacuate and go to the 1967 borders. But we can achieve peace even with our closest neighbors based on 2 major pillars. One would be education. I will elaborate on that if you will. Please. Right now, when I say education, I mean the incitement to terror has to stop. The payings of salaries and bonuses, even to the slaughterers of 2 months old Hadass Fogel in her bed by the Palestinian Authority, not by Hamas, has to stop. The glorification of murderers, like by naming streets and buildings after them, like the government building in Ramallah, which is named after Yahya Ayash, aka the engineer, al-Muhandis in Arabic, who is responsible for the killing of more than 100 Israeli women and children and innocent men, has to stop. And the second pillar would be economy. What do I mean by that? You should walk to Barkan Industrial Zone. It's in Judea and Samaria, that's right. But what you would see there is Jews, 4,000 Jews and Arabs, daily working together, sharing lunch, sharing family pictures, congratulating each other for the newborn in the family or for the holidays, living together rather than killing each other. This is coexistence, this is peace in the making. And by the way, this is what those who call themselves peace activists wants to boycott, because it is on Judea and Samaria. This is what we should have more to build the bridges between us. Now, I'm not naive to think it will take years. It will probably take generations. I may not see it in my lifetime, but if I want my children to see it in their lifetime, we should start working on it now. And Morocco and the other Arab countries can play a very significant role in building those bridges between us. Now, I do believe that we were told for many, many years, as I said, you cannot have peace with Arab countries unless you resolve this. It's the other way around. We should, and one of the, we just got the official results of the Israeli elections. Finally, after 5 election campaigns for the past 3 years, we have a conclusion. A stable government headed by Benjamin Netanyahu is going to come to the world. And I do believe that one of our goals has to be to expand the Abraham Accords, to expand them, because this is the way we can achieve throughout the generations peace even with our closest neighbors, by having more and more Arab countries building those pillars and the bridges that may change the term Israeli-Arab conflict to the term Israeli-Arab alliance.
Thank you very much. You concluded, correct?
Sorry?
You concluded your remarks?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have a quick question for you before I move on and ask our next speaker, Dr. Abtissam Al-Kidbi. For a long period of time, Arab countries said, as you mentioned, once you have peace with the Palestinians, Arabs would come and do peace with you. Arabs took the initiative, starting with the Arab initiative in the Beirut, they call it the Arab Initiative, and some Arab countries even went further and established good relationship, diplomatic relationship with Israel. So certain Arab countries came and they were brave enough to sign peace, but the Israeli government did not live up to its side of the bargain. What have you done to meet those states in terms of trying to find a solution to the Israeli conflict? And I'll just give you one example. There's an Arab summit in Algeria. To see how irrelevant it was, for them to be in the news, they had to mention the Palestinian issue more than once to be in the news because they're so irrelevant, which gives you an idea that the Palestinian issue, despite the major challenges and the common challenges, terrorism, what have you, Iran, nuclear, it remains deeply rooted in the conscience of the Arab population. So what are you doing to live up to your end of the bargain and meet the Arab countries who establish relationship with Israel?
Believe me.
I'm sorry for one last thing. You mentioned about the Oslo and your attempt to forge peace with the Israelis, and you mentioned the terrorism and the bombing or what have you. But at the same time, you did not mention that certain elements within the Israeli society killed Yitzhak Rabin, which we believe, and Ambassador Ben Salah Alawi mentioned something, that this was a big blow to the peace efforts. So it's not only the Palestinians, there are certain elements, and there are concerns right now with the new government in Israel. These elements will take the lead. So can you take it for granted that those countries who signed the Abraham Accords can truly maintain this momentum?
First of all, it was not certain elements of Israeli politics that killed Yitzhak Rabin. It was a person which we condemn that killed Yitzhak Rabin. No, there was an environment that Rabin was not good and he should be replaced. But the killing was done by Yigal Amir, which we condemn, all of us in Israel. Yes, we want peace, believe me, trust me, living this conflict more than any Arab country. We lose lives of our civilians, like the other side. We want to resolve this conflict. But when we look at what we have there, we have two powerful bodies. One is Hamas, a terror organization totally devoted to the destruction of Israel and the killing of as many Jews as possible. It's written in their covenant, in section 7, you would find that they yearn to the day where the rocks and the trees, al-shajjar wal-hajjar, would shout, "Ho Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and slaughter him." But they don't only write it in their covenant, they demonstrate it by deeds. Some of the most horrific terror attacks that we have known throughout the years came from Hamas. But you know what? My colleagues from the left would say, you're right about Hamas. It's evil. But we do have the moderate ones. We do have the ones that we can talk to, right? The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that was established, by the way, back at 1964, which is kind of interesting because there was not one settlement, not one soldier on Judea and Samaria, and not one settler back at 1964, because as you know, we liberated it at 1967. So what was it that they wanted to liberate Palestine from back at 1964? Or rather, should we ask, what is Palestine? Is it really Ma'ale Shomron, Efrat, Otniel, the settlements? Or is it really Yafo and Akko and Haifa and Sfat? everything that we consider as the State of Israel. Now, my colleagues from the left would agree. They would say, you're right, that was back in 1964, but this is 2022. They are willing to compromise. They moved ahead. Why won't you? But I have to ask, have they? When in every pro-Palestinian demonstration, you would still hear the same old slogan, today, 2022, saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now you know the map. This is the river, this is the sea, this is the State of Israel. Where does it put us? Taking swimming lessons, probably.
But you know, Mr., that these are slogans. That in reality,
no.
In reality, things have moved.
I absolutely disagree. When you listen to Abbas Zaki, a very high-rank official of the PLO, not Hamas, saying on camera in Arabic, not in Hebrew, not in English, don't say, and I quote, you can find it on YouTube, don't say we want to destroy Israel. Don't say it. The world doesn't want to hear it. We are talking about the 1967 borders. But the Rais knows, the PA president, Mahmoud Abbas knows, and we all know that once they will withdraw to the 1967 borders, we can take them. But don't say it, it is not proper diplomacy.
Look, I see.
So it is not mere slogans.
No,
it
but
is
what I'm
the
saying,
narrative.
If we want to go who said, we will go forever. You know, at the same time, people will come to you and say, you know, the group of the newly elected Itamar, they used to chant death to Arabs. So if you want to go to these elements.
What did he say about Arabs? Can you quote?
They changed it now. They said death to terrorists. They used
Yes.
to, so he told them after he got elected.
And I fully agree.
I know, before they used to say death to Arabs. But anyway, we're not going to go into this who did and who that, because both sides can make their case.
Please,
and they have enough.
Give me an offer. What should we do to have peace? Give me an offer.
Look, I'm the moderator today. I'm not a panel. But I can recommend something very simple that the U.S. had
Because
always.
we have tried.
No. The U.S., a major ally of Israel, always said, why don't you stop the settlements? They call it impediment of peace. Let's start here somewhere. Let's start with this one.
Please tell me, did we have peace before settlements?
I leave that to my
No, we
colleagues
didn't.
on the panel to answer you.
No, we didn't. We didn't. When the state was established back in 1948, there was not one settlement of the 1967 borders, but yet 5 Arab militaries tried to eliminate us.
So you don't think settlement is an impediment to peace at all?
Not only that settlements are not a barrier to peace, settlements are the path for peace, because we are on our land. Once our neighbors understand that we are going nowhere, and we fully understand that they are going nowhere, we will have peace.
Great. Thank you very much. We will probably, I'm sure some of the audience and some of the panels will come back to you. And please, let's close your mic. And I ask Dr. Ibtisam Al-Kidbi from she's the chairwoman of the Emirates Policy Center, United Arab Emirates. Dr. Al-Kidbi, please.
Thank you, Muwafaq. Sabah al-Khair. Good morning to everybody. Well, I will take you all to another wide range of Abraham Accord, how it's impacting the geopolitics, okay, rather than to just keep it in the issue of Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, 2 years on, the Abraham Accord produced new dynamics in the Middle East under the banner of cooperation between Arab countries and Israel. Now, it has contributed towards building a new understanding of regional partnership. The strategic momentum built by the Abraham Accord has shaped the contour of a new geopolitics. It occupies space and debates on regional security and integrated projects in sectors such as energy, technology, trade, security, defense, health, tourism, and name it. it seems that empowering regional solutions and approaches will be part of the Middle East new reality with more visible American support. Without American, you cannot push the peace process, even though this new reality has not yet taken its final shape. Now, on the new regional reality, Abraham Accords have contributed to creating a new momentum. We can talk about the following. The Abraham Accords have created new partnership in the region. Of course, I am optimistic, and those from my side also believe that the Abraham Accords have changed the rules of the game in the region. And I call it in the beginning, this is a game changer. Even those disagreeing with the conclusion, at least they agree that the Accords have created a new regional environment. However, this environment has not succeeded, at least so far, in ending the stalemate in the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. The impasse can be ended if regional and international actors push in a direction where Palestinian and Israeli benefit from the Accords. This has not come yet. The Abraham Accords also introduced cooperation projects with strategic dimensions in the Gulf, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. This is a broad picture. Such cooperation can reshape relations and forge new alliances and partnership among countries in the region. You can see before the Abraham Accords, the relation between Israel in terms of cooperation, Jordan and Egypt was really called peace. Now the Egyptians are engaged in reaching a solution, especially in Gaza, and I think also the Jordanian are. I will not take a long time because I know, Muwafaq, you have questions for me. But I would say 2 years after Abraham Accords signing, these agreements have emphasized that regional countries, needs to tackle dispute in the Middle East by themselves. We always, it happens that we always looking for the solution coming from outside, waiting for the American to take the first step. This time, it shows that it can be, and it can be solved between the regional actors. And they shouldn't always look to the foreign powers to help resolve regional conflicts. In this sense, the Abraham Accords partially reflecting what we call it burdens sharing strategy. Both Arabs and the Israeli, they try to solve the conflict between themselves. Now, the Accords also can help enhance security cooperation and harmonize security policies and plans between NATO and non-NATO countries in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords also provide the opportunity to build a new and more effective security cooperation model between NATO and its partners and friends in the Middle East to serve mutual interest. If you only put the Abraham Accords, that you cannot move step forward without solving the Palestinian issue, and you cannot cooperate in any issues, I think you put yourself in the corner. And my country, UAE, when signed or moved to sign the Abraham Accord, was thinking that 7 years we are trying to solve the Palestinian issues. And we have been trapped there and we couldn't move forward. Why not to try to think out of the box, and why not to try from the other angle, and let's the Israeli see the half full of the glass, and normalization can bring benefits from them, and from there we can solve the Palestinian issues. I don't like to be biased, and I'm an Arab, okay? But also I am realistic. I also look to the Palestinian side and see that also they don't want. I remember when we signed the accords, they just started condemning UAE and those signatories. They didn't see, okay, can this agreement bring for us some benefits? Why we don't jump on the table and try to negotiate with them and try to see also they should put us in the middle of this accord? They did not, Muwafaq. Look to Abbas, look to the others, okay? They have also, their people are suffering. There is a new generation, wants job, wants to live. And you can't just put them under their leadership either, between Hamas or Abbas, whom they don't want to leave their chairs and they want to stay there forever, regardless what is their people are suffering from. And I'm finishing.
Thank you very much. Before I ask Dr. Paul Salem to address the audience, I have a quick question for you, Dr. Al-Kadbi. What's keeping other Gulf states from going forward and taking the step that your government took and signed a similar agreement of the Abraham Accords in the Gulf? They don't see eye to eye like you. You have common interests. You are an GCC alliance. What's keeping them, in your opinion? Why are they reluctant to do that?
I won't say reluctant, but I think each of them, you know, there are, well, each of them wait for the moment, but also you have to realize that there are some constraints on some of them, okay? Either they have internal constraints, well, if we are talking about Saudi Arabia, okay, and it's not easy. Some of them, because of Iran, and here I did not say that, I want to mention, this accords, it's not against any access in the region, and UAE, from the beginning, said that, okay, we know we have the Iranian whom they are not happy with this agreement, okay? So how you balance your relation, I'm talking about my country, between Iran and between Israel. Some of them, they already, like Qatar, opened many years ago an Israeli office in Qatar. Sometimes some of them, they want to hold the nationalist flag and play with that flag, okay, to mobilize the people behind them, okay? And I would say this is not a realistic approach, okay? If you want to bring, even for the Palestinian solution and peace in the region.
I would answer the question with one word.
Patience, patience. Thank you.
Patience. Oh, they didn't hear me?
No. But
I will
they heard my
answer the
translation.
question with one word بالعربية مغربية. صبر. Just wait.
Thank you.
Patient.
Dr. Paul Salom?
Any question or just
I wait until you
opening
finish your remarks and I will
Okay.
ask you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Sabah al-khair. Yeah, I mean, a lot has been said, and I don't want to go over, things that have been covered already, but to pull back a bit and look at, the Middle East in general, there isn't a Middle East. There isn't one Middle East. You do have sort of emerging axes in the region. Obviously, you have an emerging core, which is parts of the GCC, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, with Morocco, with close relations with the US, similar approaches to regional issues, and that's a very important coalition that's emerging. You also have, as Dr. Kitbe mentioned, an Iranian, let's call it sphere of influence, which extends to Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and Gaza to some degree. Those two coalitions or axes are in a very bad place. The tensions obviously are extremely high. Even in the last few days, there was threats or potentials of renewed attacks from Iran, potentially on Saudi Arabia. Obviously, the whole issue of return or not to the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, seems very unlikely now, but the whole question of the future of the Iranian nuclear program, what that might create in the region, what that might elicit in terms of military actions from Israel, new potential for risk and war. That is very, very concerning. And you have a third major player, which is Turkey, which has not yet defined its place in this Middle East. For a while after the Arab Spring, they hoped that they would become the inheritors of, through the Muslim Brotherhood and others, of power in Egypt and Tunisia and Syria and Yemen, and that they would emerge as the neo-Ottoman kind of, power in the region. Turkish ambitions have been much curtailed. Yes, they have a presence in northwest Syria, a bit with Libya, a bit in Iraq, but Turkey, as you can see, is still very much looking for a role. When I look at the Middle East in general, there are four major civilizational building blocks with all their varieties, of course, but the Arab core, which is very different from Morocco to Oman to Yemen to the Emirates, but it is sort of that Arab core. You have the Israeli sort of presence, very powerful economically, culturally, historically, and you have the big Turkish presence and the big Iranian presence. When I look long-term at the Middle East in the 21st century, the breakthroughs between Israel and the Arab countries are extremely significant. They are, in my mind, a positive development. Of course, as we see, they have not yet resolved the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which is extremely important for the Israelis and the Palestinians, but it is regionally important. But when you pull back until the region also finds a mode of cooperation with Turkey, a mode of cooperation with, I don't know what, the Iranian people, with Iran in general. I don't see it with the Islamic Republic, but until we reach that point, I have a lot of concerns about the region. There's always been talk about a peace process between the Israelis and the Arabs. It has borne fruit. We have no such active process really with Turkey, no such active process certainly with Iran. And Iran is going through its own internal dynamics, whether that will bring moderation to Iran or, as maybe my colleague Dr. Ibtisam mentioned, they will lash out maybe and try to hide internal problems with external ones. Also, when you look at the Middle East, it is really different Middle East. There are a number of countries which are successful, wealthy, doing great. Israel, one of them, UAE, one of them, Saudi Arabia catching up, Qatar doing very well. But the Middle East also contains completely failed states, such as Yemen or Syria or Libya, the worst conditions almost in the world that you see in Yemen. So the variety of what you have in the Middle East is extremely, extremely different. And then you have a group of countries in the middle where tens of millions, indeed hundreds of millions of people live, which are in extremely strained conditions. And that has nothing to do with the Abraham Accords or with Iran and so on, but with the multiple shocks that some of the big countries, which are not the oil exporters and are not the rich ones, like in Egypt, like Morocco to some degree, Tunisia, Jordan, which is already they were in a very difficult demographic situation, high debt levels, slow economies, low levels of foreign direct investment. Then they were hit by COVID, which meant no tourism, which meant slowdown in economics, which meant huge public expenditure on public health. Then they were hit again this year by a huge spike in energy prices, huge spike in food prices, and a huge rise in inflation. And the impact of inflation is not only on the livelihood of the citizen, it's also in the ability of these governments to finance enormous debt burdens, which have become really, really much more expensive to finance given the inflation situation in the world. So when I look beyond, the successful countries, Israel, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and others, I worry not only about the failed states, the Yemens, the Syrias, the Libyas, and to some degree the Lebanons and Iraqs, but even those ones that have managed to keep going, the Moroccos, the Tunisias, the Egypts, but things are not well, the stresses are big, and I worry because of the Russian war in Ukraine that the coming months will get much worse in terms of the winter, price of energy, the weaponization of food, and all of that. So these are not easy times for the region when you look in general. I am hopeful, or at least, there are elements definitely of the Abraham Accords, elements of President Biden's visit to the region, where they did emphasize the need for all of this tremendous wealth that is being transitioned from the world to many of the Gulf countries because of these huge energy prices, to use a good amount of that wealth to address food security, public health, and debt relief or debt management, to help the other countries in the region get through this very, very difficult time. There's also been talk about the tremendous role of Morocco, the biggest producer of fertilizer in the world. And fertilizer is now almost as important or more important than oil and gas, because it's how people manage to eat while food prices are so high. So Morocco's role also in this is regionally very important and globally very important. Now, this all comes at a time when the global order, as the whole session, the whole conference is looking at the global order, there is really a huge challenge, obviously, to the global order, with an open war in Europe and, uncertainty as to what's going to happen in East Asia and the Pacific and so on. A big question for the Middle East is, where is it in this new global order? We're all aware of the tensions between the US and the West on one side, and where most of the core Arab countries have come out in this, particularly the crisis with Russia, not really aligning, as the US and West would like, sanctions and, all of that on Russia, but rather taking, call it an unaligned position, take it, I don't know what you want to call it, at a time when this is, a hot war in Europe, when there's serious concerns about China's ambitions and where it might end up. I'm not yet clear, and I'm concerned about where the Middle East will be in this emerging global order. Yes, non-aligned movement sounds like a good idea and sounds like a nice thing, but in effect, there were no non-aligned countries in the 50s and the 60s, and they were aligned, either with the Soviet Union or with the US. And we will have to see how this all plays out. So I'll just end it there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Salam. Quick question for you before I move on to ask Ilan to address the audience. How would the war in the Ukraine impact Middle Eastern alliances? Because, the Middle East is always influenced by global events, starting from September 11, war against terrorism and what have you. It has forced countries in the region to come together to cooperate, sometimes under the table, sometimes recently openly. How do you think the war in the Ukraine would impact the political dynamic in the Middle East?
Well, in a number of ways. Obviously, it already has in some clear ways. One of the biggest is energy. And energy, the huge revolution in the energy situation of Western Europe in particular. And that is a dividend, a new leverage, a positive, if you want, for the Middle East and North Africa, because oil and gas, particularly gas, is much more needed in the medium-term future of energy for Western Europe. It's also become a national security and global security concern for the United States. One example of that is the recent Lebanese-Israeli maritime agreement in order to get offshore gas from the Israeli side and eventually maybe the Lebanese side to markets in Western Europe. You see how much attention the United States gave to this issue. That is an energy dynamic. It does connect a little bit indirectly to, it's not exactly an Abraham Accord moment, but it is a form of cooperation, quite surprising, between Lebanese government, you'd have to say between Hezbollah and Israel indirectly, because of economic needs and energy needs. So that, I think, is a long-term leverage that the Middle East has, and that's why it's giving some of the Middle East countries the confidence to say, well, you need us so much so that we can make independent decisions. The second effect is the one I put a question mark on, is that in this historic moment, at least for Europe and the Russian-Western relationship, the fact that the core of the Middle East has come out, in effect, neutral, at least from the view of the United States. What will that do to the future of those relationships, particularly between the US and Saudi Arabia, or the US and the Gulf in general? That is still early days, it's hard to say, but I must say the mood in the United States is still very, very concerned or perturbed or whatever you want to call it. So the effect is big. A third thing that I myself was a bit surprised about was a lack of buy-in, in my view, from some core Middle Eastern countries to the principle of violating the principle that you must not violate UN regulations, you must not take over another country by force for whatever reason, and really not considering that that's not our business. It's a European war, we are not concerned. I think with Saudi Arabia and the G20, with these countries playing global roles, it's my view that we also have to play a role in maintaining global order. At a time when Iran says, well, Bahrain is mine, all the Shia are mine, like Putin says, well, there's Russians in Kherson, so I have to go in. Not to stand up for those global principles worries me. Turkey says, Mosul is mine, parts of Syria are mine. To my mind, I'm concerned about that, and I was a bit surprised by that position. So I think a lot of this is still in play. We don't know exactly where it's going to end up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Ilan Berman. He's the Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. He has consulted to several U.S. government entities, including the CIA, the Pentagon, and the U.S. State Department. Mr.
Right, so I'll pretend like I know something.
That was a marketing thing.
No,
so
I appreciate it. So I'm enormously glad and honored to be here. This is tremendous, and I think the insights here are valuable. What I want to do, just in the interest of time, is to circle back to the Abraham Accords and really talk about just 4 things. Right, 2 of them are positive, and 2 of them are negative or potentially negative. Right. The first is that it's very clear to me that we are in a new era, right? A qualitatively new era. As someone who has spent time in all of the Abraham Accords countries, and some of them a tremendous amount of time, it's very clear to me that the dynamism is not artificial, it is organic, it is evolving, and it is something that is evident in the political and economic and the social spheres as well. And I think, coming from the United States, there's a tendency, certainly among parts of the Republican Party to say that this was a product of the Trump administration. This was created from whole cloth by the Trump administration. And I'm sorry to say that that's not correct, because the underlying ties, the cultural ties between Morocco and Israel and the massive diaspora that exists in Israel existed before. The quiet economic ties between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, for example, not official, but they existed before. There was economic contacts before. And on security, the countries that are now formally aligned in the Abraham Accords were talking for a long time about shared security threats like Iran. So it's not correct to say that the United States created this out of nothing. But I would argue that that's actually a very good thing. It's a good thing because it shows you that the Abraham Accords have a strategic logic. They are not running counter to regional trends. They're amplifying regional trends. And this is why the Abraham Accords have proven so durable, right? Because there was a lot of questioning, especially in Washington in the early going, about whether or not this was sustainable, whether or not this was an enterprise that could persist and could persist despite political changes in Washington. We've now seen that it can, that this is durable, and that this is expanding. And this is the second point. There are tremendous opportunities here, opportunities that have not yet been explored by the Abraham Accord countries. The way I would explain it is, in my view, the Accords are unbalanced. There's a tremendous amount of activity on the economic front, in terms of tourism, as the ambassador mentioned, in terms of security coordination also, on a number of issues, but there's food being left on the table, for lack of a better reference. There's greater social connections that are possible, and there's greater policy connectivity between institutes like Dr. Al-Kedbi's and others, where there could be a much more vibrant intellectual dialogue between the countries. And I'll give you just two examples of what I think is possible, right? The harmonization of research work among different policy institutions is, I think, a really interesting and unexplored vein in the Abraham Accords that hasn't yet been tapped. There was a session here yesterday about think tanks and what think tanks can contribute to the intellectual ecosystem. And there was not one mention of the Abraham Accords. There was not one mention of how the countries of the Abraham Accords now have an opportunity to come together, to work on shared perceptions of security threats, of economic opportunities, of social cohesion in a way that they couldn't before. And I think that's a missed opportunity. The other question is something that Dr. Salem mentioned, the question of food. Morocco is a world leader in fertilizer. Israel is a world leader in drip irrigation. The fact that these countries are not tying up in a very robust way to promote food security in Africa is a tremendous missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity that should be rectified at the first possible instance. And these are just two examples. There's lots of examples of what might be possible in the Abraham Accords. So I'm very bullish on the idea that these accords, in addition to being organic, it's possible to expand them in a way that benefits all the countries and the region. Now, here's the glass half empty part, because I think it's necessary to point out. In politics, like in warfare, the enemy also gets a vote. And what you're seeing very clearly over the last 2 years is the emergence of a rejectionist front that sees the Abraham Accords and the normalization that it breeds as a threat to the bloc's regional geopolitical position. This is a bloc that's led by Iran, but it includes elements in Yemen, it includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, it includes a number of other actors. And I hope that I'm wrong, but I believe that it's only a matter of time until the bloc that rejectionist bloc, moves more assertively and possibly violently to try to derail the progress that's being made, under the assumption that regional geopolitics, as seen by many, is a zero-sum game. So I think this is a danger. It's a danger that's acutely felt in places like Bahrain, for example, and I think it's something that we don't do ourselves any favors to discount. And the last point here is the role of the United States. I would argue, and again, I'm American, so take it for what it is, but I would argue that America's role in this process is essential. It's essential as a nurturer, and it's essential as a validator of these processes. Other nations need to be encouraged to join, there are now really interesting conversations, quiet conversations that are happening in places as far-flung as Indonesia and Pakistan even. There's louder conversations that were happening until recently in places like Saudi Arabia. But all of these conversations about integration need to be fostered, they need to be nurtured, they require international attention. And more than anything else, I would argue they require American attention. And to my great regret, this is something that the Biden administration has not capitalized on so far. This is, American politics are enormously heated. We are 4 days away from an election, so they're especially heated right now. But over the last year and a half, we've seen, I would argue, I think it's fair to say we've seen a hesitance to embrace the dynamism of the Abraham Accords on the part of the sitting administration in Washington. And I think that's a real shame because it has misaligned the United States and American regional policy from the dynamism that you're seeing in the region. And it's something that should be corrected. And the Chinese character for danger is both crisis and opportunity. And I would argue that there's an opportunity here as well. As I said, we're 4 days away from an election. It's going to be a consequential election. Anybody who is studying the polls, as I am, as I'm sure Dr. Salem is, anticipates a Republican takeover of the House. The Senate is a little bit more tenuous. But what I'm seeing in Congress is a tremendous appetite from Republicans to take up issues that have so far been ignored by the Biden administration. The Abraham Accords and investing in the Abraham Accords is one of those issues. So for everybody in the region who is watching American politics, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to engage. It's an opportunity to foster positive engagement and more of a regional strategy on the part of the United States. So I'll end there.
I have a quick question for you to follow up on your last idea. How would the current administration help advance the Abraham Accords? If you were to advise them, what should they do?
Just a couple of ideas. So one of the I think, very high-profile and symbolic and unfortunately unhelpful moves that the administration did upon taking office was a zeroing out of something called the Abraham Fund. The Abraham Fund was a venture capital fund which was intended to create a financial ecosystem that would foster investments in Abraham Accords startups, among other things. This was something that had been conceived of under the Trump administration, hadn't really been executed, but the Biden administration made a declaratory statement that the Abraham Fund would be defunct, would no longer be capitalized by the United States, as had originally been advised. I think that's a missed opportunity. I think American money talks, and the idea of American investments in these types of dynamics, not just rhetorically, but also economically, is enormously significant and people would notice, right? That's one. The other question, to go back to what Dr. Salem was talking about, is the food security question. This entire continent right now is struggling with the second order and third order effects of the crisis in Ukraine. Countries in the Middle East are as well. The United States and our partners in Europe can play a stabilizing role in, for example, creating a regional food bank that would allow greater stability on the part of these countries and would bring them closer together under the umbrella of impartial moderators. And the Abraham Accord countries, I think, are great opportunities here, have a great opportunity here.
Thank you, Farah. Before I open the floor to Q&As, I have a quick question for Mr. Ohana. As Ilan mentioned, there's a risk that the Democrats may lose the House and most probably the Senate. So it's a toss-up. And now you have a new cabinet headed by Netanyahu. Do we fear a situation similar to the one that existed during former President Trump and Netanyahu? Do you see the relationship between the White House, Biden's White House, and Israel going towards that coalition? And if so, how could the U.S. play a role in advancing the Abraham Accords?
Well, I think it is all players' interest to strengthen the Abraham Accords and to expand them. For Israel, it has always been very important that the relations with the United States of America, which is our closest ally, will remain bipartisan. So we could work with Democrat presidents, we could work with
Is it now?
Republican. This is a question. This is a question because we see some radical anti-Israeli statements made by a certain section of the Democratic Party.
The left.
Yes, the section of the Democratic Party, but still we consider President Biden as a very close friend, not only with the State of Israel, but also with Netanyahu for many, many years. And I'm sure that the same way that Netanyahu had sometimes disagreements with former President Obama, but they knew how to work together. And there was a great cooperation in many fields between Israel and the States, even when the dispute was at its peak regarding the Iran deal, as you know. I'm sure we can do it in the future with any American administration because there are so many shared values of freedom and democracy between us, and we also share interests, both countries. So regardless of who will be the next president and which party will he come from, we will have to maintain the strong relations with America.
I'm sure these shared values would be tested soon between Netanyahu and Putin because they have a good relationship. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
A
quick
quick one
comment.
because I need to open the floor.
I
Please
mean,
go ahead.
a quick
Paul.
comment about expanding the Abraham Accords. I mean, really, the big element is Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's not Tunisia, it's not, you know, the smaller countries. It's Saudi Arabia, and and some elements of that. The UAE's Abraham Accord with Israel was partly in exchange for Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time, suspending the annexation. If you recall, there was about to be an annexation of the settlements.
So they can leverage the Israeli government because of the good
Well,
relationship.
I'm saying that the UAE got something. The UAE doesn't have a big public, you know, doesn't have a big political challenge. So from the Saudi side, and they've said this, you know, in private conversations, of course they're interested in joining and moving forward at some point soon, but they need something. They need something from the Israelis. Other countries like Sudan or Morocco got something from the Americans. The Sudan was removed from the terrorism list. The Morocco get US recognition of the Western, big things, Western Sahara. Saudi Arabia obviously has troubled relations, particularly with this administration, but it might want something from the US as well. UAE got, you know, promises on the F-35s and so on. So these deals have elements in them, and they need a broker. Jared Kushner was very much that broker at the time. Obviously today, if you look at the constellation, you don't have that. The US-Saudi relationship between Biden and the Trump is not good. It's not going to be good. So it might need to await 2025. When there's a new US president, when the Israelis might be able to figure out, you know, they were able to give the UAE suspension. What, you know, what might they give the Saudis, quote unquote?
Thank you. أفسح المجال الآن لبعض الأسئلة في الدقائق القليلة المتبقية. الرجاء سؤال واضح مش محاضرة وتحديد من تريد أن يجيب على السؤال. Please state your name, affiliation, and a question, not a lecture. And tell who you want to address your question. Please, the mic here, our friend Mujazzar.
Okay.
No, please, you come next, please. Thank you.
تحياتي للجميع.
Quick one.
دكتور رمضان أبو جزار، مدير مركز بروكسل الدولي للبحوث. الانتخابات الإسرائيلية الأخيرة أفرزت يمينا متطرفا جدا في إسرائيل. هذه الانتخابات أفرزت هدية إلى إيران وحزب الله وحماس. أيضا المتحدث الإسرائيلي ونحن في أرض المغرب الملك محمد السادس رئيس لجنة القدس الذي يدافع عن القدس والمكون الإنساني والفلسطيني داخل القدس لن يسمح بأن يكون أحد المتحدثين يقول أن المستوطنات هي الطريق للسلام والمستوطنات هي عدو السلام. الاتفاق الإبراهيمي وكان هو خيار زعيم المساواة والإنسانية شيخ محمد بن زايد لن يسمح بأن يكون هناك فكرا متطرفا يكون شريكا في هذا الاتفاق. السؤال: هل اليمين
لمين السؤال؟
سؤال للجميع. هل وجود اليمين المتطرف وبن غفير الذي يطالب بقتل العرب هو مقبول ضمن الاتفاقات السلام الأخرى أو اتفاق الإبراهيمي أو غيره؟ شكرا، وشكرا للمغرب، وشكرا لجلالة الملك الذي هو رئيس لجنة القدس ويحمي القدس من هؤلاء المتطرفين الموجودون هنا في القاعة. للأسف بس كلمة، المتحدث الإسرائيلي لم يحترم المتحدثين ولم يحترم MEDays ولم يحترم القاعة وأكال أكاذيب كثيرة. شكرا للمغرب.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think I know you replied to his question, so I'm not going to ask you to answer. I would like Ambassador Salah Alwi to address the points that our friend just mentioned. It's not that I don't want you to, but I can anticipate your answers.
Well, I had a couple of questions to the panel. If you allow me, I'll put them afterwards.
Okay, just one.
Just a very quick.
I need to ask from the organizer 5 extra minutes, please, because it's a great panel, and the audience are, I'm sure, enjoying the discussion. So I'm going to ask for extra 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Just very, very quick answer to our friend. I do think and I do hope that Morocco's moderation and attachment to dialogue will prevail, even if it is with hostile people, and His Majesty just demonstrated that he is giving hand to invite the Algerian president to Morocco. So I do hope that we will have a constructive dialogue with the new government. It has been chosen by the Israeli people. We have to deal with them, but I do hope that they are not going to hamper and to spoil all the potential that are in these accords. So it is a real hope. Very quick question to Ptissam. You said that the accords have been game changer. What is the impact on the GCC? Is it going to consolidate, or is it going to increase the rift that has started before? Sorry, it's a difficult question, but I hope you will answer it. And just a very, very quick comment on the expansion of the Abraham Accord. I have been so long in international relations. I do think that we need to consolidate the basis before the expansion. I'm for quality rather than quantity, because the quantity was such heterogeneous and not really a solid common ground will not be really for the success of this. Very quick question, to Elan. You have actually preempted, but it's very different because the role of America is absolutely central. Let's face it. And I hope that Biden is not going to spoil the best legacy he got from Trump, which are the Abraham Accords, because we had the feeling that the slackening of the support of Joe Biden might endanger the quality of the accord. You have just mentioned the fund. I wish you could give us just what prospect you have in that.
Thank you. At the end of this session, I'm going to ask each speaker to conclude with 1 minute. So I think you will take into consideration the questions that the ambassador just raised. Quick question for you. With the Netanyahu heading a new government, can we say the two-state solution is dead?
Well, I think not only Netanyahu, but also our coalitionary partners are being demonized by Israeli media and probably by foreign media. And some of the things that we hear are coming from that demonization. Netanyahu has been the prime minister of Israel for 12 years on a row. I don't think that it was bad for the region. It was good for the region. It was good for peace. It brought, as I mentioned earlier, not 1 but 4 Arab countries peace agreements with Israel. And I do believe that if we would not have been in the opposition for the past year and a half, we could have seen both in quality and in quantity an expansion of the Abraham Accords. Now, the honorable yet hostile speaker accused me of saying many, many lies. Can he name one?
Yep, let's not get into that now. Thanks.
Just one.
Please, I think the organizers told me to conclude, so I ask every speaker to conclude with 1 minute, please. And I apologize from all of you.
Okay, so just very, very briefly to answer the ambassador's point, I think there is, I'm sure everybody has watched, there is this unfortunate ping-pong quality to American politics that's taking place lately, where every administration comes in and fundamentally rejects all of the policy priorities of the previous one without measuring them and seeing if they're actually applicable to their own worldview. I think that's very detrimental. I think a lot of that has driven the silence of the Biden administration for a long time about the Abraham Accords. There was a presumption of denial that came in from the new administration. They're beginning to talk about it now. And I think the only way, especially when the Democrats control the White House and Republicans will control at least one chamber of Capitol Hill, the only way to move forward and to give the support to the Abraham Accords that they need is to create a bipartisan policy on the Abraham Accords, one that isn't sort of tethered to one party or the other, but that everybody in the American political sphere understands that this is good for American security and it's good for the region.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Paul, because you're my friend.
Yeah, well, my point, I would reiterate, I mean, we're talking about the rich and famous in the Middle East, and that's important, and you know, those are important things, but we have to remember the tens of millions, you know, that are, some of them living in abject poverty and disease, whether it's in Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere, and then the other tens of millions that are under extreme strain. There are some states which could stumble in the next few months because of energy prices, food prices, inflation, and so on and so forth. So the rich and famous in the region should help with those that are not rich and famous. And finally, as it relates to the Abraham Accords, that to the degree that the Gulf countries and the other Arab partners could work with the Palestinians to help them refurbish their domestic situation and their political leadership, in a sense, so that they could be in a better place for that opportunity if it comes down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Dr. Abtissam, please.
This region has been plagued by crisis, by bloodshed. The only way to move from the situation where we have been and we're still in is by how to reach the formula win-win situation. My country tried this with Iran, with Turkey, even with Israel. This is the only way to move from the old doctrine, and we have this young generation who wants to live in a new era, okay? They are more advanced than our generation, and we cannot let them inherit the same what we have. We have to give them a new future and bright future.
Thank you. Points well taken. Thank you. Ambassador.
Just a very quick note, and I will follow, you know, on the previous speaker example. My hope is that the Israeli youth will learn directly from the origin of their parents by coming to Morocco, and not only on social media, as they are doing very actively. That's my hope. And my other hope is that it will improve the global partnership and cooperation among Arabs, because it can be as well a catalyst for a better and closer relationship on the principle of complementarity and overall atmospherics it will create, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you for ending on a positive note. Please.
I join both hopes, and I also want to take my minute to send our deepest regards of good health to King Mohammed VI, that gave his patronage to this conference. I think I speak for many of us here on that.
For everyone.
And to thank him for his bravery, leading his country, although I can understand that the slightly hostility that I faced here, he also faced, and the other Arab leaders also faced in their countries regarding
In your
moving
case,
ahead
it's a
with
bit
peace.
justified.
Sorry?
In your case, it's a little bit justified.
What do you mean?
No, I mean, you were so critical of the Palestinians, so...
Anyway, what I want to say is I salute them, the Arab leaders, for moving ahead with peace. This is the right path. I believe that more and more will come. As I say, sabr.
Thank you very
Patience.
much. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their insights and great debate. Thank you very much.
Sitting or standing?
No, no.